What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for Your Overwatch. I am very excited to bring you this advanced guide on Wrecking Ball. And lucky for us, Hamster mains Play Overwatch just tweeted out a very cool jack-o'-lantern skin that he'll be getting tomorrow. I might actually have to unequip the Junker one for the first time in my short Hamster life. So we're going to go over each of his abilities and their practical application in the game, but first, I want to discuss and sort of explain the philosophy of how we're approaching playing him, or rather, what his role even is. I think any way you slice it, it makes the most sense categorically to call Hammond a main tank. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have another main tank alongside him, because really, we're just going to be getting in the weeds of semantics over what defines what. In my opinion, because Hammond is the tip of the spear of your engagement, he makes a lot more sense playing as the main tank, whereas the idea to me of an off tank somehow builds synergy and utility with the main tank. So D.Va is kind of the number one off tank in the game. Zarya and Rein have natural synergies, but Zarya and Hammond do as well, and although Roadhog doesn't help his team with damage denial, he synergizes with Orisa. So typically, the two tanks want to go together like peanut butter and jelly, and what happens is, if your team also has a Winston or a Reinhardt and you're playing Hammond, you sort of have a battle on two fronts going on, because neither of them synergize with playing with Hammond's playstyle very well, because he just outpaces both of them. So really, you either have an off-tank help him, like Zarya Bubbles or D.Va's Matrix, to help deny some of the focus that's going to come onto him, or you just outright play another main tank and play sort of a battle on two fronts and just let Hammond more or less go off and do his own thing, but still have a main shield for the team. Now, there's going to be a lot of debate about that, but I think it'll make a lot more sense as we start to break down his playstyle and the crazy tricks and shenanigans that you can get away with on Wrecking Ball when you start to maximize what he can do for the team fight. And that's the first thing that we're going to focus on. First video, a lot more about his damaging abilities. We'll get to that, but here I want to show off the obnoxious state of not letting the enemy Reinhardt play the game. Look away, Reinhardt mains. I beg your forgiveness for this completely obnoxious play that I am spreading, but when you're really good with your hamster movement, you can knock around the enemy Reinhardt at will, as long as you avoid any of the CC that they might be tossing at you. But rolling around and just knocking him out of the way is a really big play for your team, especially since a lot of teams don't play Lucio. So what happens is, if you knock that big shield out of the way, it's like they don't have a shield. Remember, Rein gets all of his value being in the right spot. As soon as he's CC'd away from the fight, where his hammer can't hit and his shield isn't protecting, granted, your team doesn't have any shielding either because you're playing Hamster, but it opens up lanes that their team comp typically would have been protected against with the shield in the proper position. So the thing that you want to look out to do is just CC that Rein. There's two ways to use the swing. Most common is launching yourself up in the air in order to get the Piledriver, but you actually get a ton of distance just rolling right at the enemy. I mean, how many times have you been playing on a map on 2CP and the Rein Zarya is just up in your team's grill and you can't move forward? Yeah, maybe you play your own Rein and bully him away and win that brawl battle, but what Hammond does to Reinhardt is just force out that fight entirely if you want to do so. Playing Hammond in this way is one of the most literal forms of space creation, because you want to be looking to create opportunities to put enemies into the line of fire of your teammates. Or of course the other way, use your rather infinite boot potential to get the enemy tanks off of your team. Now I want to break down a few examples so that this isn't just confused as spinning around like a maniac, because that isn't objectively good all the time. Just merely hitting the enemy about haphazardly isn't good enough. You have to actually know where you're sending them and why. Let me show you an example of something that was nearly a massive mistake. Here on Ruins, I don't secure the Widowmaker kill, but I force a ton of peel. The Brigitte's back here on me. Ana's healing the Widowmaker. So in this type of situation, I have to realize that I'm pulling more resources out of the enemy, and even if I don't kill the Widow here, I'm in a good spot. But once I get the Widow kill, I go a little dumb and force the Rein in to engage, which honestly he could have chose to do anyway. Like, this isn't even a terrible call for him to do, because I launch him right at my Ana, booping him multiple times, which in my head, I'm thinking, oh, I'll split these guys up and then we can divide and conquer. But the way it panned out is I just sort of put him on the point and the Ana in line of sight of him. So really, they land a couple abilities there. They might clutch that entirely back. So you got to be careful with this kind of thing. Really, the best thing I could have done is knock them away from the point, because right now we just want to cap them jumping on to contest. Although yes, it's going to give us ult charge, farming up an advantaged fight. It also caused our Ana to die, which could have threw the entire fight. And I want to emphasize this because it's plays like these that really gets teammates mad at Hamster players. Unless you are actively creating sightlines for your team all the time, you're just a DPS, and often a bad one if you're not securing kills on your own. It's the CC game that Hammond has to really excel at, in my opinion, to be worthy of a pick over a more reliable tank character. A much better example of CC is this big flank that I go on Dorado that does get scouted out, but because I have 600 HP, I get away with murder, forcing the Reinhardt off the high ground, pile driving the Zen, cracking open the fight. Now, I do end up dying here, but this is the kind of example of breaking open the fight, which is a term that I borrowed from Pool long ago to talk about initiating into fights. With Wrecking Ball, it's even more literal, smashing heroes out of the way so that the shields elsewhere or damage can land on the key targets like Zenyatta. These are the type of plays that you're looking for. Now, once you start using your roll technique, you can get even more value out of it by knocking them off the map, just like you would when you're setting up for a Lucio boop. But now, with all the extra durability of Wrecking Ball, you can play even more aggro for knockoff plays. Now, knockoffs in general are a bit niche, but not for Wrecking Ball, really. I think most people know Piledriver is his best ability, but since it's on a long 10-second cooldown, and you get your grappling hook every 5 seconds, exactly half the time, that means in between doing Piledriver initiations, getting value out of CC is what you want to look to do. Because if you stand around shooting too much, you probably should just have a Diva or a Roadhog. And if you play too defensively, well then why not have a barrier tank for your team? The CC is what justifies Wrecking Ball getting picked. CC and mobility plays, of course, because Wrecking Ball has obnoxious movement when you really get used to it. We covered mechanics mostly in the first video, but a few further tips that I've amassed in my many hours of maining him. When you're rolling, be sure to use the momentum to jump around, either to accurately hit targets that you would have otherwise missed, or do dodge shots. And as well, take the time out to practice to spin around a payload, or to judge the amount of distance that you have in order to do so. This clip on Rialto, I really get away with murder stalling this objective because I've combined a few elements of Hammond's kit to do so. I can face tank a ton once I hit a big adaptive shield, allowing me to hang on the cart, not even feeding ult charge for the majority of that health, spin in circles to avoid damage and deal it, somehow confirming a mercy kill, using my speed to get over to a mega health pack to heal myself, and then jumping back in time for my next Piledriver, causing disruption and stalling the cart. It's plays like this that really highlights the high skill cap that Hammond has, and I think you'll find as you start to really master how obnoxious you can get, that's when you start to really make space for your team, because ideally what you want to do beyond CC is pull out cooldowns from the enemy, hopefully without dying. Now this next clip shows an example of that. Now I'm not entirely proud of this clip. I feel like I went in a bit too early ahead of my team, but not too much. Because oddly enough, Hammond does work fairly well, being almost like a dummy engage in order to pull out some of the most crucial cooldowns of the enemy to set up your teammate. I knew we had Nanoblade here, and I probably do all the same things, make the space, force the enemy's cooldowns out, and survive if I just wait a little bit longer, maybe a second or two before I go in. But in any case, there's a few things that I want to point out here. As I get over the enemy team, I pop Adaptive Shield, hovering above all of them, while behind the enemy's shield. Now you gotta be careful with this because if you're too high in the air, it won't actually count, but I really like using shields in the sky, just like I do over the Reinhardt here on King's Row, because oftentimes, if you try to shield after you Piledriver, you can get chain stunned before you even really get to use it. And once the enemy starts blowing cooldowns on you, you kind of want to roll away. So often, you're safest when in the sky, as long as you're close enough to the ground for it to still count. Doing so will stall you in air and you'll still get to pile drive anyway. So I personally love that technique because there's a little bit of a debate on how to use adaptive shield most reliably. I think some players use it as an escape tool. When they feel under pressure, they pop it to run away. But remember, it lasts 7 seconds, and if you do it right, you could reliably get easily 1,000 to 1,200 HP. So in my opinion, I think it's much better to try to carefully land it, stay in the fight while you have shields, and try to get the enemy to attack you into your barrier. Because what you want to happen is have the enemies to use all their stuns, their anti-nade, sleep dart, whatever, onto you, rather than onto a more crucial squishy DPS teammate. Now, of course, you don't want to get slept and left there, but often the enemy's just calling ball, 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 and if you're in the mix of the fight with 1200 HP, you can face tank a lot of stuff. Remember, we're in a control meta right now, which means cooldowns are king. So I say, use adaptive shield to face tank enemies' cooldowns, or at least to allow you to have more presence in the fight longer. Because in many cases, I think drawing cooldowns out is even more important than staying alive as Hammond, as long as you have the teammates that are going to come in with you or after you, making use of the space that you've made with your initiation. Okay, the entire video has been about all the team-based stuff. That's boring. When's Hammond get to frag? Because we know that's all anybody ever wants to do. Okay, Piledriver is the key ability. Despite everything I've showed you thus far, a lot of rolling around, CCing the enemy, what have you, all of that stuff I put at the start of the video because I want you to make sure you're doing that as well. But the number one thing is looking for money Piledrivers. This is the ability that makes or breaks your Hammond play, as if you can't land it or can't get value out of it, you probably aren't getting value out of the pick. Now, setting it up is fairly simple. You want to find something high up to attach onto, go for a swing, and it's the dream if the swing melee hits the target as well on the way up. Come down with a Piledriver to direct them as well. Combine both of those, you got 150 burst damage, the likes of which that scares even Brigitte. Now, I pause on that matchup specifically because I want to warn that all of the rolling around tactics that I suggested earlier doesn't work very well against Brigitte, but this swing into the sky, aerial strike Piledriver is incredibly good against Brigitte because landing her directly with the Piledriver knocks off her armor health and CCs her up for focus fire, on top of the fact that you're in the brawl popping adaptive shield, which is too much HP for her to whittle through. And once she doesn't have armor health, your weapon is actually quite strong. A small tangent on Hammond's primary fire. It's got quite a bit of range on it, honestly. So don't get confused in thinking that you have to get up close and personal like you do with Diva. It actually doesn't fall off until 15 meters. That's really far for a tank. So although the shots feel fairly weak, they're quite good damage for the amount of range it has, but you do have to be very careful to hit all your shots and not waste any rounds because your ammo supply of 80 gets burned through very quickly. In comparison, Winston has more consistent damage over time since he has way more ammo because it takes him a much longer time to chew through that 100 ammo mag. But the advantage Wrecking Ball has is that he spikes his damage much faster, he can headshot, has better range. Overall, Hammond is the dream when it comes to offense from a mobility tank. One cool tip about Piledriver is that normally you have to be above jump height to be able to initiate Piledriver. But you can kind of cheat this mechanic by hooking off the ground up onto a ledge. And right before you land on the ledge, you can almost Piledriver up to it, making it a lot easier to aim and a bit more responsive for the time it's going to take to hit your target. You swing up onto the ledge, hit Piledriver immediately, and the enemy has far less time to react to your best offensive move. Now, there's two last things that we're going to cover in the video. One is his ultimate, and then we're going to further break down engagement strategy and how to handle play-by-play decision making to apply the things that we've covered today. I feel like his ult is fairly easy to get guaranteed value with, as long as you understand what areas of the map are important. The mines last a really long time at 20 seconds. And yes, if you plop them down way too early, the enemy may have time to destroy them, but as long as you plop them down when your team's around, it'll be a major inconvenience for the enemy to destroy mines. So I say, don't get too cute with it. Yes, you could place down the mines in order to block off a access point to the objective, but I think that's kind of a risk. So instead, I say always just plop it onto the objective whenever it needs to be contested, because even if it doesn't get kills doing that, it forces the enemy to have to rethink their approach immediately, and sometimes it even gets you the objective for free. Otherwise, you can plop it down on choke points or behind the enemy as you know they're going to need to disengage from an ult setup. You can plop it right on top of the enemy death ball, especially if you're launching a grav at them as well. And my last tip about the mines is I would say it's not better to launch them at a really high altitude, because spreading them out makes them less lethal overall. Now, in the cases where maybe you do want a really wide spread on them, go for it. But I think they're much more dangerous when you drop them on your opponent and there's a tight cluster that they have to avoid, making it more likely that two land on them rather than it only being one and then them dodge the rest or are too easily able to shoot one in their way. The ult's very useful whenever objective stall is in play. Obviously, if the enemy's trying to come back and stall it, they have to run back into your mines. That's a big deal. But also, if you're trying to stall the objective, tell your teammates to try to hide in the minefield, because there's a lot of characters, Doomfist, Tracer, whomever, that have to get really close to your team. So take solace in the safe space of the friendly mines and try to get value out of them. Or you never know, try to tell your Lucio teammate to boop someone into them, or using the crowd control tactics we discussed earlier, try to knock people into the mines yourself if you can help it. I will say though, the mines are better against Orisa because she can't escape them, although they could definitely bombard a Reinhardt as well. Because he has a really wide arc on his hammer swings, he can kill a lot of them before they get armed if he starts swinging immediately. So be on the lookout for that. Now we're going to take a look at a few different types of engagements and the decision making on how to handle each one. Here, Control Center, we're down a man up against Ryan's Zarya, but I've already talked to the team about our win condition. Playing ball against this, the goal is to move the Ryan shield to set up for an anti-nade, whether that's by deliberately knocking him to the side or by creating so much pressure behind them, it'll force the Rhine to turn. And even though we were down a man, the big burst of extra health I get from Adaptive Shield to survive in this brawl long enough to scrap it out creates an angle for an anti-nade that carries the entire fight. I love playing ball on 2CP because oftentimes teams put Ryan at a choke. Well, look at this massive knockback I get on him, opening the door for my team to start to come in. The Brig tries to chase my Doomfist, and even though I went way further away from the fight, I'm back into the brawl before the Rhine can get there. This is how you use your movement speed of Wrecking Ball to be a major advantage. You can set yourself up to be a threat at any moment. Now, similar scenario here on King's Row. We're playing triple tank this time, which is definitely something you might want to consider. Knocking the Rhine shield out of the way opens up for my team to hit real health points. So by the time I go in again, the Zarya is already low, allowing for my Piledriver set up to finish the kill. Knocking the shield out of the way makes the openings for that damage to land. Here on Dorado's streets, going on a mad flank to find the best opening. A rather low proc on the adaptive shield, but notice how I don't end up taking any hull damage, and they start tossing Fire Strike and some shots at me. I call that a win, because I don't really want my healers to have to spend too much time focusing on me when I'm going on flank missions. I'm a little bit more liberal with my shield usage when I'm flanking than I am when I'm trying to do a big engage into an entire death ball. And here I'm kind of playing footsie with the enemy Ana. I don't want to get slept, and I also want to pressure her down. So using my roll every 5 seconds to come at her, and my medium range primary fire damage is still quite effective. As you can see, all the targets that I aid in killing in this clip, those cannons did some significant hurt at quite a ways away. Guys, that's gonna be everything for today's Hammond video. If you did enjoy it and you found it useful, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, because we do upload each and every day. So you're gonna want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.